Bendy and Boris in the Inky Mystery by this animated phantom and Markaway. Chapter 8. The First Step. The boys awoke about midday, and the sun drifted high in the sky. Bendy groaned in annoyance. So much for leaving first thing in the morning. Sasha was cooking them a nice lunch. She still seemed really nervous. She would check on them every few minutes, and she was fidgeting, constantly doing something like she had to stay busy. "Where are you two heading again?" she asked over her dark wood table after she set down the meal. "Sorry, can't say," Bendy answered after swallowing. "And why not?" she demanded.
"It's just better if we don't,"
Boris said. Sasha huffed. "Promise to be safe?" she asked, looking at the table, downhearted. "Of course, Sash. You know us, we're reliable." Bendy smiled and grabbed a toothpick on the table. "You mean a pair of troublemakers," she teased. After a moment, she sighed. "I really can't stop you, can I?" "Short of calling the coppers on us, no." Bendy leaned his chair back on two legs. "Did you just say short?" Sasha asked in amusement. Bendy stuck his tongue out playfully. It wasn't long after that the boys were pulling on their packs and heading to the door. Sasha fretted like a mother hen. "Are you sure you have enough food?" she asked.
"Yes,"
Boris said. "And coats and blankets. It may be summer, but it can still get chilly when the sun goes down," Sasha said.
"Yes, ma'am,"
Boris said. "And you packed your toothbrushes?" "Oh my stars, Sash, yes, we have everything we need." Bendy mocked exasperation. Sasha blushed and shoved Bendy's shoulder, but she was smiling. Bendy chuckled. "All right, Ginger Snap. Oh!" She suddenly turned around and left. She returned quickly and pressed something into Bendy's gloved hand. "Take this too." He looked down to see a large roll of bills. "Sasha, we can't take this." Boris gasped at the money. "Shush now. I can't get by, and the club will always bring me more. I want you boys to be safe. Please take it for my peace of mind." She smiled sincerely. Both were speechless. Boris suddenly wrapped her up in a hug.
"Thank you, Miss Sasha. Thank you for everything,"
he said, his tail wagging. Sasha laughed and returned the hug. "Yeah, Sash, you're the best boss I never had," Bendy said. She looked over and dragged Bendy into the hug too. She kissed both boys on the cheek before pulling back. "Now you'd better get. If you linger any longer, I'll have to tie you up and keep you," she said, her eyes suspiciously wet.
"Goodbye, Miss Sasha."
Boris waved and turned to leave. "Bye, Sash," Bendy said with a goofy grin on his face. "Goodbye, boys. Be sure to write me, you hear? Don't just disappear on me," Sasha said with a wave. The two made their way down the hall and to the back exits. Sasha overheard Bendy. "Bro, I got a kiss. I told you I had a chance." She heard Boris laugh, but not his reply. Sasha took a moment to pull herself together. She had to come to terms that she couldn't do more. She wasn't their parent or sister, and she really couldn't do much that wouldn't either get the cops involved or her in trouble. They were determined to go their own way, and they had made it so far without any adult help. She got one last glance of them outside her window. "I'll miss you too," she sighed and leaned against the wall. Boris couldn't help his tail from wagging as Bendy paid for the tickets. The wolf was practically wiggling with excitement. Bendy calmly collected the tickets from the booth and headed to the platform. The two waited on a bench for about 5 minutes before Boris couldn't take it anymore.
"So, where are we going?"
"I got us tickets to Warnerberg. It'll be a rest of the day ride on the train," Bendy said.
"Is it near Toontown?"
Boris stood up and walked around the platform. They were the only ones there. "Nah, but it's closer than here," Bendy said.
When is the train going to come?
Boris asked with a glitter of excitement in his eyes. "About 45 minutes," Bendy said, leaning back and shutting his eyes. Boris went around the platform a number of times, trying to control his excitement. He couldn't believe that they were going. He imagined what Warnerberg would look like, and his mind went to Mickey's show and the cityscape that was around the mouse circus. He tried to imagine the sight and sounds and smells. He felt like he was going to go on an adventure. As Boris enjoyed his excitement, Bendy took the time to think. He knew if he mocked sleep, Boris would leave him be. He played the last 48 hours of his life over in his mind. He'd seen someone die, saw his old job lit in flames, panicked for his brother's life twice, was nearly arrested, had his home ransacked, ran away, and had 2 pain attacks. He took a deep breath. This might have been the worst couple of days of his life, and that wasn't a record he wanted to break. He wasn't sure what this Oswald guy could do either, but at least it was a direction to run. In the end, Bendy felt overwhelmed and a bit like he was drowning. He eventually mentally shrugged it all away, because he couldn't really do anything. What he didn't mean to do was fall asleep. It was a cold, miserable night. Bendy felt his stomach clench even tighter, like a small black hole was opening up in his middle. It'd been 4 days since he had last eaten. He was feeling so fatigued, but he was afraid to fall asleep in the snow right now. He was afraid he'd never wake up. No one had given him anything from his street begging, not a penny or even scraps. The trash cans didn't have anything edible either. He had taken to chewing cardboard to at least comfort himself a little. He dragged himself down the empty main street. It was getting late, and he was so tired. Other kids his age would be in bed after their parents tucked them in with bedtime stories. They played in the snow and laughed. Bendy hated the snow. It was cold and seeped into the holes of his destroyed shoes. It would gather up on his head and melt into his face. He couldn't remember the last time he felt the tips of his fingers. Would he really survive this winter? Something reflected the poor street light into Bendy's eyes, and he squinted and looked up. It was the butcher's shop window. His mouth watered. The butcher had chased Bendy away once or twice when he'd begged in front of the store. He had just wanted to get enough to buy a few slices of ham. Bendy crossed the street and pressed his face against the glass. There, amongst the sausage links and chickens, and in the center display, was a huge, juicy-looking roasted ham. Bendy's stomach practically sat up and begged. The boy whimpered. Could he take it? Stealing was supposed to be wrong, but leaving food out like that was bad too, right? He was so hungry. What would happen if he got caught? He looked up and down the street. It was still empty and silent. The world was muffled by the snow, like it was sleeping, with a white blanket covering it. Bendy didn't know how long he stared at the meat, but he finally started to move. He had first thought of breaking the glass, but decided it would get him caught. He chewed his chapped lip for a moment. He could use that, though it might break more things than if he just threw a rock. His stomach gave another pathetic growl, and he shrugged. Bendy held his breath as he reached out to feel the dark shadows from inside the shop. They withered and whirled excitedly. He watched as the ham was pushed against the display case window.
Come on, open the case.
Bendy panted out loud in a quiet whisper. His breath fogged the air in front of him, blocking his view for a second. The shadows banged the ham against the window 2 more times before he could get the case door to slide open. Bendy was terrified that someone would hear it and appear at any moment. The meat tumbled out and bounced on the floor. Bendy held his breath again and waited for someone to appear. When nothing happened, he let out a sigh of relief. Now, he just needed to get the meat by the door and unlock it. He didn't know if he could get something as small as a lock to turn from the inside, but he had to try. Bendy focused again and tried to get the shadows to move the ham to the door. Instead, the darkness chucked the ham up and straight at Bendy and the large window. Bendy let out a squeak of surprise and the ham crashed through the glass, spraying shards everywhere. Bendy covered his face with his arms and let out an when the ham collided with him. It knocked him into the snow and he groaned on his back before sitting up. He couldn't help the wide grin at seeing his prize sitting on his lap. A light from the second story of the butcher's shop turned on, and Bendy could hear exclamations from inside. He scrambled to stand up. When he was finally on his feet, he wrapped his arms around his prize and booked it down the street. He moved just as he heard the door bang open. "Hey, you rotten kid! Get back here! Give me back my meat! Demon thief!" Bendy didn't stop and didn't look back. He sprinted as fast as he could, jumping fences, slipping in and out of alleys, and running through snow-covered bushes. His lungs were on fire, his eyes watered from the stinging cold, and if he thought he was tired before, he was completely spent now. It wasn't until he was near the outskirts of town that he collapsed in a tiny alley that had a few trash cans and a pile of cardboard boxes. He leaned his back against the freezing brick wall and sucked in as much air as he could get. His legs felt like jelly, his chest hurt, and sweat was freezing into ice on his fur. Again, he looked down at his prize and grinned. It was all worth it. He was going to eat like a king for a whole week. Just as he was about to take a bite, he heard something shift in the alley. He snapped his head up and instantly reached for the shadows. His coiled body was ready for anything. "Who's there?" he demanded. He got no response. Bendy pulled himself up on shaky legs. "I know you're in here. Come out!" he barked. Still nothing. Bendy hesitatingly made his way deeper into the alley. He heard another shift and pinpointed it behind the boxes. He crept up to it and peeked around it cautiously. The person turned over on their bed of cardboard and shivered. It was a dog, or maybe wolf. He was a very skinny one. He looked far too skinny, actually. Bendy wondered if he even had the energy to sit up, because it didn't look like it. The guy only had a thin jacket over a torn shirt and shorts. He didn't have any shoes, and the pads of his paws looked cracked. Bendy peered closer. Was that dry blood on them? Bendy was just about to back away when the wolf, Bendy guessed that was right, opened his eyes. Bendy froze as they made eye contact. Bendy had never seen such dull and hopeless eyes. They reflected only emptiness and despair. Bendy's eyes widened at the person. The wolf furrowed his brows, his ears pinned to his head. He blinked, then curled up to himself and shut his eyes. "Hello?" Bendy didn't know what compelled him to speak. He was doing it before he realized it. "What's your name?" The wolf didn't respond. Bendy was again going to shrug and back away when the wolf opened his eyes. They focused on Bendy and pinned him in place. "I'm Bendy. Can't you tell me your name?" Bendy tried again. The wolf blinked, his eyes dropped to the ham in Bendy's arms, and Bendy tensed. Wolves could be vicious, and this guy looked like it had been a long time since he had eaten anything. He felt bad, but it was a cold day in hell before he let this guy take his prize. The dead eyes didn't stay on the ham long. They traveled down his person and then back up, taking him in completely.
Red eyes,
the wolf muttered. Alarms went off in Bendy's head. He had kept his grip on the shadows this whole time, which caused his eyes to glow. That scared most people, but this guy didn't seem to really care. Oops. Bendy chuckled, embarrassed and surprised. Sorry, it's kind of a talent of mine. I don't mean to look scary. The wolf blinked and one ear raised. Did that mean he was curious? He looked curious. Bendy let go of the darkness and his eyes returned to normal. The wolf blinked and turned his head in a way that only canines were capable. Sorry for bothering you. Bendy turned to go.
Boris.
Bendy stopped and turned back around. The wolf was sitting up. He was a little wobbly, and Bendy could now see how much his thin clothes hung off him. How long had it been since he had eaten? Bendy also realized with a start that this wolf was a pup, a kid that was maybe a little younger than him. Sorry, what was that? Bendy asked, completely taken aback.
My name, I'm Boris,
he said again, watching Bendy. Bendy tilted his head a little. It's nice to meet you, Boris. The wolf's eyes went back down to the ham and then away, like he was ashamed to even want something that wasn't his. Bendy looked down at the ham and up at the kid. It could feed him like a king for a week, or it could feed a starving pair for a couple of days. Bendy approached the wolf with a sigh. The kid's dull eyes snapped back up to him, and the wolf watched him warily. He stopped in front of Boris and tried to wear his best smile. Well, Boris, I've got this huge ham with me, and I don't think I can eat it all by myself. If you're hungry, do you mind helping me? Boris' eyes widened, and his jaw dropped a little. He looked like Bendy had just pulled the cardboard out from under him.
Why would you do that?
Bendy shrugged and sat down in front of the wolf. 'Cause I know what it's like to be hungry, and no one should have to go through it. That and food tastes better when you're eating with a friend. He looked down and started to separate the meat. This was the wolf's chance to deny him, to say he didn't need a friend or whatever it would be. Bendy glanced up and was shocked again as he saw tears run down the kid's face.
Friend? Me? You want me to...
A sob choked him to silence. Bendy blinked. Well, sure, I don't have any friends or family. It'd be nice to have a pal around, he said. Do you want to have a friend? The wolf nodded. The two went on the ham, and after they had eaten, Bendy stashed the rest away for tomorrow.
Bendy?
The demon turned around to face the wolf pup again. Yeah?
I'd like to have a friend.
He hesitated, looking scared, and Bendy smiled to reassure him. He could hear the but coming. Boris didn't want someone like him. He expected that, because he was scary after all. The kid needed food though, so he was probably scared to say no to Bendy. Bendy was okay with that. He got it.
But what I really want is a brother.
Bendy was floored, and his eyes widened.
Is it okay for us to be brothers?
Boris looked terrified, but there was a gleam in his eyes, a spark of hope amongst the despair. Bendy mentally shook himself. Are you sure you want someone like me as family? I can be kinda scary. The kid blinked and shrugged.
That's okay. Everyone can be scary.
Bendy shook his head in amazement. Yeah, okay, I can be your brother. We can watch out for each other and stuff. Boris' ears perked up, and he gave Bendy a warm smile as his eyes lit with a humble joy. Bendy felt a warmth bud in his chest.
Okay, thanks, Bendy.
Boris grinned.
Bendy! Bendy!
Bendy jerked awake. What's going on? Bendy looked up at Boris.
You're gonna miss the train pulling in!
Boris exclaimed excitedly.
Look, you can see it!
He pointed. Bendy followed his finger, and sure enough, there was the train speeding down the track toward the station. That's great, bro. Bendy yawned and stretched his arms over his head. He felt his back pop and he had a crick in his neck. He groaned to himself. No more bench naps for him. They were gonna kill him. He couldn't help chuckling. He was amused, watching Boris become more and more excited as the train drew closer. In a short amount of time, it pulled into the station and stopped with a whistle. Boris hopped on with a bound, Bendy close behind him. The two found a nice spot tucked away in a corner with seats facing each other, so passengers could talk to one another. The seats were cushioned and wide. Bendy let out a happy sigh as he sat down and shoved his backpack under the seats. Boris wondered at the cabin a bit. He was absorbing every detail with awe.
Hey, Bendy, think they'd let us look at the engine?
Boris asked. Bendy chuckled and shook his head. Probably not, Boris, but when the guy for the tickets come by, you can sure ask him, Bendy said, resting his head on his hand.
Okay.
Boris continued his exploration. Bendy just watched out the window. His mind went back to his dream. It was more of a memory, actually. It had been a long time since he thought about that night. He wondered idly why his mind had brought it up. Maybe it was because that night changed his life for the better? He didn't remember anything before that time. So he considered it a beginning chapter of his life, and the next big step had been when they got an apartment. Maybe it was because this was going to be another chapter. He kind of felt like he had lost everything, but he knew he hadn't. Boris sat down across from Bendy. Bendy still had Boris, so this was a journey that Bendy could handle. Somehow. His eyes suddenly lit up as a whistle sounded.
We're moving!
The pair stared out the window and watched the station begin to slide away. Boris practically had his face against the glass. First the station, then the town slid away from them. Soon it was a pinprick behind them. Boris' tail wagged in excitement.
Wow, we're going so fast!
He said. The landscape blurred by in a screen of forest branches and open fields.
Oh yeah!
He suddenly pulled his bag out from under his seat and reached into it. Bendy cocked an eyebrow. What's this, bro? Bendy asked. Boris looked up from his pack sheepishly.
I forgot. I found the present I got you yesterday before...
He trailed off and furrowed his brows.
Before everything happened?
Bendy turned his head a little in inquisition. He barely remembered Boris explaining that he had been late getting back to the garage because he had gotten Bendy something. Oh, bro, you didn't have to do something like that, Bendy said. We have to carry everything with us too, he pointed out.
I wanted to, and I know you won't mind carrying it.
Boris pulled out a square wrapped in packaging paper. He handed it to a curious Bendy, who held it carefully. Thanks, bro, he said, and pulled the paper loose. Underneath was the latest book from Felix the Cat's Adventure series. Bendy's eyes widened. Books weren't always cheap, and this hardback was new. Boris, thank you, he said in awe. Boris grinned, knowing Bendy liked it.
Yep, And now you have something to read while we travel, he said.
Bendy didn't waste any time. Boris returned to the window. The two passed a few hours like this. They were only interrupted by the ticket guy. Bendy learned he was called the conductor and that no, they couldn't go look at the engine. The rest of the day was traveling, and by the time they reached Warnerberg, it was late and they were exhausted. They couldn't see much of the place pulling in, just the lights of the streets blurring by before they finally came to a stop at the station. They made their way out and looked around. The street was empty of people and the shops were closed. The two looked at the unfamiliar street.
So, where are we sleeping tonight?
Boris asked. Bendy sighed. I have no idea, Bendy admitted.
Bendy.
Boris sounded exasperated. Bendy saw from the corner of his eye Boris' shoulders drop. Bendy smiled apologetically and shrugged. Hey, how was I supposed to know? Come on, let's find a place that's open, Bendy said, taking a step forward. Boris rolled his eyes with a smirk at his brother's antics.
That is so like you,
Boris muttered. Bendy chuckled. The two took an hour and a half wandering around the town, looking for a place that was open. Bendy noted that the town was quite a bit bigger than Sullyvision. Bendy could easily get lost here if he didn't pay attention. They started when a dog bolted out of an alley, with a cat clinging to its head.
This place is a bit creepy,
Boris said after recovering from the shock. Bendy chuckled. What, getting cold paws? Boris snorted and looked away. They spent another hour before collapsing by a tall wall. Boris leaned against the wall with a sigh.
Think we should just give up and try tomorrow?
Boris asked. Bendy growled from his cross-legged position next to the wolf. I don't want you to sleep outside, he said. Boris stared at Bendy confused. He took in Bendy's serious and frustrated glare burning a hole in the asphalt. He snorted a laugh.
I've done it before.
But we got out of that, Bendy muttered. He still refused to look at the wolf. Boris tried to figure out what Bendy wasn't saying.
Yeah, we did,
he said slowly.
And we will again. This is just a journey. We can't take a house with us, he chuckled. I don't mind sleeping under the stars, bro. We still are 100 miles beyond where we were.
Boris took a deep breath and looked up. The street lights blocked out the stars, and the moon was barely there, but the night was calm and cool. The air was crisp, barely any wind, and smelled of damp asphalt and greenery. Boris smiled. It was a nice night. Bendy seemed to work through his thoughts. Sorry, bro. I guess I'm just hung up on the fear that we'll be stuck out here again, he said. Boris shrugged.
There are worse things.
Yeah. Bendy sighed and leaned against the wall like Boris. I just wished we'd get the better things occasionally. Boris chuckled.
I got you, and the sun and the moon. What else do I need?
Bendy smiled. That is so cheesy, bro. Boris stuck out his tongue. But I'm happy with you two, Bendy said. Anyway, we better sleep. I'm tuckered out. We'll get breakfast and then head on out in the morning.
Okay, Bendy,
Boris smiled. He shifted his bag and, using it as a pillow, curled up and fell asleep. Bendy smiled and went back to gazing at the sliver of the moon. Boris really had a gift to fall asleep so fast. Bendy was a little jealous. He sighed. He would have to be smarter than this from now on. He was certain the city streets wouldn't be as kind as small-town streets. They had just gotten a slow start is all. Tomorrow he would do better. Bendy felt something shift, so he scooted over to give Boris some more room before going back to sleep. It felt like a few minutes later that something poked him. "Hey, wake up!" Bendy cracked an eye open. "You two can't be by the main gates. Go on, shoo!" It was a large, heavy-set man in a security guard uniform, and he looked like he'd forgotten to shave. Bendy sat up, stretched, and yawned. "Sorry, sir, we'll move," Bendy said, half awake, while reaching over to shake Boris. He looked at the two unimpressed, but turned to leave. "Come on, bro, they're kicking us off the crib." Boris grumbled, but sat up and rubbed his eyes. The sun was just peeking over the horizon. Dew clung to everything, and the boys awoke damp and cold.
"Can I sleep more when we move?"
Boris mumbled, barely awake. "You can sleep on the train," Bendy said, and leaned to his other side to grab his bag without looking. He patted the ground before turning his head and looking. There was no backpack. It took his sluggish mind a moment to absorb this fact. The pack was gone. His favorite book, Boris' drawing, his clothes, some of their food, and all their money. "Boris!" Bendy was on his feet in an instant. Boris jumped and yipped in surprise.
"Bendy, what in the—"
Boris squeaked. "The bag's gone! Someone took my backpack!" Bendy claimed, his hands flying to his goggled head.
"Bendy, don't worry, I'm sure we'll—"
"No!" Bendy stopped looking up and down the street and shot a panicked look to Boris. "You don't get it. The bag had all our money, bro." Boris froze before zipping up next to Bendy.
"You had all of it in there? What about what Miss Sasha gave us? What about your satchel?"
"All of it," Bendy said, and returned to looking up and down the streets. His satchel only had their photo, Boris's present to him, and his pair goggles.
"Bendy!"
Boris exclaimed, exasperated. I know, Bendy said. "Hey, you twos!" It was the guard again. "I said scram!"
"Sir, could you help us? My brother's backpack was stolen."
Boris approached the fat man. "That's got nothing to do with me," he slurred. Bendy scowled. Was he drunk? "Aw, gee, thanks, pal. You are real swell." Bendy's voice dripped with sarcasm. "Now I's gotta give you the boot," the guard stated. Yeah, hey! Bendy barked when the guard suddenly grabbed him and Boris by the scruffs of the neck. Just when Bendy was gonna flail, he felt a sharp snap to his backside and was sent flying. He heard Boris yip right behind him. The two sailed across the street and into a park. Bendy crashed into a tree and landed in a twist of branches a good 30 feet above the ground. Boris crashed through and landed in a bush below him at the base of the large oak. Bendy groaned from his tangled upside-down position.
"Bro, are you alright?"
Boris called from the bush. "I'm stuck in the tree! No, I'm not alright!" Bendy shouted and started struggling. He felt himself drop 2 inches.
"Hold on, you might fall out doing that,"
Boris said. Bendy stopped and craned his neck back to look down, or up, depending on who you asked. Boris was pulling himself out of the bush.
"Boy, when he said he was giving us the boot, he meant it."
Boris chuckled, finally free. Leaves and twigs stuck out of his clothes here and there, but otherwise he seemed fine. "If I ever see that schmuck again, I'll show him what a boot looks like," Bendy growled.
"Brother, that's not going to help us,"
Boris stated deadpan.
"How are we gonna get you down?"
he asked. "I thought you had an idea," Bendy scowled. Boris shrugged. "Great." Bendy grumbled and tried to cross his arms, only to be stopped by branches. "Hey, what's all this ruckus around my house? Who are you? What are you doing?" An old squirrel woman came around the tree and glared at Boris. She had a closed umbrella in hand and a hat with a flower sticking out of it on her head. "Oh great, another dog," she grumbled to herself.
I'm sorry, I'm a wolf,"
Boris clarified.
"Even better,"
she stated sarcastically. "Hey!" Bendy barked, already on a short fuse. "Leave him alone!" The squirrel's eyes snapped up to him. "Well, what do you have here? Another one of you Warners? What the name of Sam Hill are you doing in my tree?" She put her fist on her hips. "Warner? Never heard of them, and what I'm doing in your tree is trying to get out of it!" Bendy snapped. "Watch it, shrimp, or I won't help you out," she said. A smaller squirrel came around the tree. "Who are you calling a shrimp, you nut-munching hatliner?" Bendy snapped and twitched to flail again. The blood was starting to rush to his head, making him a bit dizzy.
"What's going on, Slappy?"
the little squirrel asked. "Some schmuck Warner is stuck in our house, and his dog keeps barking about it," she said. Boris smiled weakly, hoping they would help, even if his brother was being very rude. Bendy sighed in defeat as the upside-down sun picked its light through the leaves to the unfortunate devil. This was not exactly how he pictured his first day out of Silly Vision.